Morning and welcome to House Transportation on Thursday, January 16th. And our first witness this morning is, and welcome, it's Ken Valentine, Budget and Program Manager, Agency of Transportation. And he's going to help educate the committee like we're going to spend the next week or so diving into more and more of the agency to gain a little bit more depth and an opportunity for every member to ask questions as you go is what we would like to do. Just raise your hand and we'll recognize you as we go. And questions come up, we have plenty of time for some back and forth as needed. And with that, welcome, and it's all yours.
Thank you very much. For the record, my name is Ken Valentine. I'm the Director of the Asset Management Bureau within the Highway Division at VTrans. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk to you a little bit today about who we are and what we do and why we do it. Joining me today is Julie Nakamura. I just want to introduce Julie briefly. Julie is one of our new, well, she's not new, our rotational engineering programs. So this is a program where we take engineers that are new to the agency and rotate them through the various sections over the course of about 3 years. And Julie is just starting with us in asset management. So I invited her along to see what we're doing today. So Julie's been a star every place she's landed. So this is great. And my presentation is fairly short, so by all means interrupt if you have questions along the way. Before I talk about the Bureau itself, I want to talk a little bit about what we mean when we say asset management at VTrans. Fundamentally, that means getting the best long-term performance from our highway assets at the least cost. Whenever anybody talks about asset management, a slide like this is going to show up showing condition on the y-axis and time on traffic on the x-axis over time. The first curve with the dotted section below, that represents how an asset starts in good condition and deteriorates over time. If you imagine we build a bridge, it's obviously new when we walk away from it, and that can deteriorate over the course of 50 or 75 years. The principle of asset management is that you look for opportunities to invest lower cost treatments earlier in its life. So rather than waiting till it gets very bad and replacing it, you might do things like paint it at 10 years old, replace a membrane between the deck and the pavement at 20 years, maybe replace the deck itself on top of the existing beams, and substructure at perhaps 50 years. And by doing so, the goal is to maybe get that bridge to live 100 years. The advantages are twofold. One, that it costs less over the long run, and two, the asset is in a better condition for the traveling public over that period. So a lot of what we do in asset management is try to avoid a sort of worst first approach to finding projects and such. There are certainly times we do that and we need to spend money on some of the stuff that's in very bad condition, but we want to be sure we're carving out some of our resources to keep our good and fair assets in good and fair condition, because we know that's the most cost-effective way to do it. The Bureau itself has about 33 engineers and technicians and analysts and GIS folks within it, divided into 3 sections: corridor management, budgeting and programming, and data management. But more importantly, I like to talk about what we do, and that's our mission is to provide quality, data-driven recommendations to guide actions and investments in the highway network. So there are really 4 ways we do that. We monitor and report on the condition of our assets. We predict future conditions and create investment strategies. We turn those strategies into coordinated projects that can actually get built. And then we align those projects with available funding as we work to create the capital program that you folks will consider in the coming weeks. Throughout this, we focus on transparency and accurate data and objectivity. One of the key assets we keep track of is our pavement conditions. So we contract with some folks to monitor the cracking and the smoothness and the rutting of our pavements. They use a van like this one. It's a very sophisticated piece of equipment. We test the interstates annually, and every other year we do the state highway network and the interstates as well. This van has a lot of cameras, sensors, lasers, a whole lot of location equipment and data compilation computers, so we can track this all right to use.
Do we own that or do we rent that?
For our network-wide data collection, we contract with the vendor to do it. We actually do own some testing equipment ourselves that we use for isolated purposes, but for network-wide condition, we contract that out. Yeah, this is probably, I'm sure this is more than $1 million piece of equipment. So
thank you.
Yes. Another key piece of assets we, of course, look at is our bridge, and our bridge inspectors are actually part of the Asset Management Bureau. We inspect our bridges for both safety elements and the elements that we use to manage them cost effectively. We inspect our long structures, which are those longer than 20 feet on a 2-year cycle, and our short structures, which are between 6 and 20 feet on a 5-year cycle. If there's a bridge that has a particular concern, we'll look at it more often than that. So we do the bridge inspections on the interstate system, the state highway network, town highway bridges as well, and rail bridges. We do the town highway longs, not the town highway shorts. And because this is, well, because it's a good idea and because it's partially funded through the federal government, we use federally mandated standards and reporting for all this information. That allows us to stay consistent and compare our performance with other states in the nation. So pavements and bridges are the big ones, but we also look at some of the ancillary assets, things like small culverts, of which there are tens of thousands, signs and sign structures, signals, pavement markings, slopes and ledge cuts, and a lot of smaller things too, guardrail and park and rides and a lot of those other assets as well. So we try to look at the network as a whole and manage all these things collectively. That's part of our challenge. So what do we do with all that information? Like I said, we try to model future conditions and work on some investment strategies. We use some very sophisticated models, which are housed under the umbrella of what we call VAMIS, which is our Vermont Asset Management Information System. This is a piece of commercial software, but one we've been using for, gosh, probably close to 40 years or in various generations. We use that system to track the authoritative inventory and the conditions of all our assets. The modeling has some ability to analyze potential treatments and judge them by their relative cost-benefit ratios of all viable treatments, and then it will help identify the combination of projects that collectively deliver the best returns for our investment. The other thing it allows us to do is to run multiple budget scenarios, so we can sort of do what-if scenarios of what happens if we invest at various levels in various asset classes.
So, Ken, so what I'm gathering then, you're saying every single asset, every piece of what the state transportation is responsible for, every piece of it is inventoried and every piece of it has some system level of inspection and is managed in a plan somewhere that it's going to be addressed as needed. That's what that, and we do this on a constant, regular.
You're describing it matching our aspirations. We're a long way towards that. I cringe a little bit to say we know every asset and all the connections, but that's what we're working towards. Yes. So we have very good information on bridges and pavements. We have fairly good information on culverts, although of course being buried underground, so they're hard to know what's going on there. Our sign inventories, for example, when you get down to, we certainly have all that information on our large signs. Small signs, there's always a lot of question about where exactly they sit and how old they are, that sort of thing. But we're working towards those for the bulk of our important assets, and we're aspirationally looking for everything you described, but we're starting with the highest value and sort of backing away from there. So yes.
Representative Powell?
Yeah, just on that same topic. So you've got sort of this database and constantly adding more information to it. So if somebody, an employee, is driving by and sees a sign knocked down, or a crosswalk button's not working anymore, how does that information, what people observe, or a big pothole has started, and somebody complains or somebody sees it, or the plow truck or whatever, how does that go into this, or does that go in, sort of above it, and how does that?
It probably depends on the circumstance. In many cases, what you're describing would be tackled by our district forces, who would sort of keep track of that internally, a sign knocked down. That would not enter into this system, that sort of thing. Crosswalk fading, probably not. We tend to do annual or less than annual inspections of things like our bridges and such. So our information, or our system, is focused more on higher level stuff rather than day-to-day management. Now, that said, we do have some other GIS-based mapping systems by which we track what are called corridor needs. So if districts are aware of a significant failing culvert or a slipping ledge or a flood issue, they can log that information in a way that that it becomes visible to all of us and we can keep track of that so we know there might be a need nearby. And I'll touch on that more in just a little bit. But the other thing that we're working on now, which is a big project but fairly exciting, is we're working to integrate this asset management system with our maintenance management system so that the information that the maintenance folks have fits and dovetails with our information and vice versa. So we're speaking the same language across those. And our systems will know when districts do work on an asset. For example, this happens all the time. If in the springtime, the districts were to pave a half-mile of road, we will now recognize that improvement in our system. So when we go out with that pavement man and do the testing, we understand why a given section got better last year to this year, even though we didn't have a project to do there. So we're working towards that coordination. So our systems are very good and they recommend treatments in various locations, but they don't choose projects per se. There's still a lot of engineering judgment that goes into taking the recommendations from our systems and turning those into projects that are coordinated and constructible and logical. So our corridor management folks look for opportunities to coordinate work and make sure that we're not tripping over ourselves. They look at what I described the corridor needs to see if there are any spot problems that can be addressed as other projects are coming through the area. We want to be sure we stay on scope of the original project because that helps control the costs. But if there are easy things that can be done while we're there, we'll look for those opportunities. And finally, like I said, we work with our maintenance teams to make sure that the boots on the ground information they know is recognized by us and that in turn, they know what we have planning. So they may not go out and do a fix on a road that we're planning to pave next year, sort of thing. The screenshot here is just the first page of what we call our new project summary, which is a program we're starting with our paving projects, or we have underway with our paving projects now, to look just for those opportunities for coordination and make sure we're not missing some obvious thing when we come through. If there needs to be something minor like a turn lane or restriping, it's a need that's been identified. This is the place where all that information gets put in front of the designers so they can make informed decisions. And as I mentioned, we also, in asset management, we help develop the budget. So we're looking at projects as they're getting ready for construction, and we're aligning those with the federal and state funding we anticipate are going to be coming, so that there's money available for projects and projects available for the money. Since we have a pretty good idea of network-wide conditions, we will have some input on relative expenditures between programs. So how much we want to spend on a bridge versus paving versus parking rides, that sort of thing, or any of those other factors. And then we look within those programs, we try to line up the projects so that the right projects are going to have the funding available as those projects become ready. This screenshot is from last year's budget presentation. You'll see something like this in the coming weeks, I am sure. Finally, we do have a lot of folks who are very technologically savvy and good with data and presentations and the like. So when you see, and I'm sure you will see some information like this over the years about historical conditions or maps about conditions, projected conditions, project locations, most of this stuff is going to come from the Asset Management Bureau. So that's what I hope to share with you today. If there are any questions or looking for details for any of this, I'd be happy to entertain them.
Representative White.
Candace White. How has recent flooding impacted your practice?
Very good question. We've had some practice lately. First and foremost, in the hours and days following the flooding events that we've had, our bridge inspectors are very busy. They would typically inspect a couple 800 bridges a year, and for the past 2 years, they've had to scramble and inspect an additional 400 or 500 bridges on short notice over tight timeframes. So that has been the most immediate impact. Going from there, we work with our maintenance, Division of Maintenance and Fleet, and our federal highway partners to identify what work is going to be emergency work, whether it be that an immediate repair or a permanent recovery project. So we make sure all those projects are programmed, is what we call them. That's sort of in our system. We look for if there are any conflicts or opportunities there, are there flood damaged work or flood damaged assets that we were going to work on anyway, or maybe a flood has now precluded the need for us to do something because it gets fixed otherwise. Flood work, for the past 2 years, there has been emergency funding available for that. So we've been able to do additional work on many, many projects. And it's on the order of 100 and something project locations that we've had over the past couple of years. So it requires some scrambling on our part. We're fortunate in that most of that work typically brings some extra resources with it. So it's not cannibalizing so much work we would have done otherwise. And while nobody likes a disaster, sometimes it's a good opportunity to get some of our assets fixed that were problematic anyway. So.
Representative Page?
Can you just describe the process? So you've got the asset management, you've sort of graded everything and look at the whole system. Then from there, every year, new projects get brought in. What's the decision-making process for that? Besides, I mean, does it come right out of your group and here for this year, we're going to add these 12 projects into the process, the 4 or 5 year process?
So my group certainly plays a role in that. It varies usually by what kind of project we're talking about. So there are some projects that are purely asset driven that we do tend to identify more internally, although working with our partners within the agency. So if there are minor bridge maintenance projects that need to happen, interstate paving projects, even like a thin overlay, some of the preservation treatments I described, we will work to identify those projects that we know are the prudent investment of our resources to keep the network going. For larger scale projects, and we haven't needed to fill the funnel over the past couple of years, there are separate means by which we work with the regional planning commissions to identify new project candidates, and there's a scoring system that we have employed in past years for a couple of reasons, not the least of which the significant inflation that we've seen in project costs, and we did a good job identifying projects for roadway and traffic and safety and bridge projects several years ago, and the reality is our project pipeline is full at the moment, so we haven't gone out to solicit new ideas, and I don't anticipate we're probably going to do that in the coming years for a lot of those programs. But my bureau absolutely plays a role in the identification of those projects, but there are certainly many other opportunities for stakeholders to have their input as well.
Yeah.
Representative Lally and then Representative McCullough.
Thank you. I am very interested in the new Vermont state standards that are being developed.
Okay.
And it seems that this provides some sort of ready-made bureaucratic administrative capacity and infrastructure. Your arrangements with the RPCs, for example, to help partner with in identifying problems and prioritizing projects. And I'm wondering if there has been any discussion at this point about how this might help us make walking and biking easier in our communities, if this has been anticipated as a potential application in your intersection with the VSS in your area.
Right, and you reference the Vermont state standards, which is not a project that I have been personally closely involved with. Mostly what my agency does is identify the needs and program the projects. And I think a lot of the choices or a lot of the design considerations you're describing happen within the design phase. So that's after a project leaves our bureau and goes to a project manager, and those design decisions are considered. Well, I mentioned our new project summaries, and that's a way where we look to make sure the designers have at their disposal all the information we have that might have been collected from communities' interests or regional plans, our bike and pedestrian priority map, that sort of thing, to bring all those to the table so that we can make informed decisions about those. So those things are never far from our minds as we are identifying and designing projects. And in fact, much of what you described is built into that project selection and prioritization program that I described previously.
Thank you.
Ken, can you just talk about the, the project conditions? You come up with percentages of, where each of our roads and bridges, stand at. Has that formula stayed consistent? Because I know years ago, they sort of tweaked it to make, to alter the numbers. I'm not saying that we've done that now. Could you just talk a little bit more about what goes into that formula? How these percentages come forward, I guess.
Are you talking about the percentage of condition?
Yeah, the conditions,
Okay.
the conditions, if that formula can stay consistent, so, is it apples to apples or,
Yeah, our, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there.
No.
Our performance measures have been consistent for decades now, I would say. And I'm going to speak first and foremost to our pavement conditions. We have two interests for which we manage our pavements. One is a travel weighted average condition. So this is the average condition of the network as experienced by users. So that's weighted by traffic. So the condition of an interstate that gets 40,000 cars a day counts significantly more than a remote road that gets 400 cars a day in that scoring. Simultaneously, we recognize that we have an obligation to keep all our roads in passable conditions. So we have another measure that says we want no more than so many percentage of our roads to be in very poor condition. And those two goals are often in tension. But we know we need to manage both of those. So we look to allocate some of our resources to, we know we need to spend some of our money on our worst pavements to keep people able to work around the state and keep the plows able to roll down the roads. And then some of it, we're managing it to make sure that the greatest number of drivers have the best driving experience they can. There are similar, that's the place where it's probably most well-defined. Our bridge conditions have also been consistent for years and years. And those are based on federal standards. They're a little bit more, or a little bit less granular. It's a 1 to 10 scale or a 0 to 9 scale. And those get binned into a good, fair, poor. So those things haven't changed, but we're always trying to manage those, not just for the present, but for the future as well. So yeah.
Thank you. I just want to make sure everything was consistent because I've been
Yeah.
long enough where I know that we tweak a little bit and numbers.
Yeah, we struggle. We struggle with that too because
Yeah.
there are certain federal measures where we're required to report for federal purposes information a little bit differently than we have historically presented to you guys, and sometimes there are questions about just inconsistencies
Thank you.
among us.
Yeah, Chris Keyser, Ken. So my experience is that we grade roads A through F type of thing based on traffic flow, which is a user diagram. Do you still use that?
We do not. I know sometimes intersection performance is graded that way. And this is a little bit this is very much outside of my expertise, but no, we don't rate our roads according to, or our bridges according to a letter scale.
But it would be the use of the road itself so that you
Oh.
know whether or not you needed another lane or what the wait times were for people based on the road capacity and increased flow or decreased flow.
There are various ways we categorize
Yeah.
the roads. And I guess I probably shouldn't speak to those because I don't know them in any great detail. So,
Okay, very good.
and Jeremy has some,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Sure. Please, Jeremy Reed for the record. So I think what you're referring to is the level of service. And so, yeah, what that does is that's more along the lines of wait times, queues at intersections and things like that. And that doesn't necessarily directly tie into the asset condition, right? That's the capacity of that specific asset and not necessarily the condition of the asset. So, as we look at project prioritization, I'll just use Representative Burke's Putney Road project. We look at that has multiple components, right? It's asset driven from just a condition perspective. There's a safety component for that, and then there's a level of service component. And so trying to, look at all of those criteria, then kind of gives it a weighting, albeit a somewhat subjective weighting, where it falls in consideration.
Thank you.
So if I understand that, then from the asset perspective, your job is to rate those assets and to work with your engineers, put that all together. What particular areas or in your area, in your department, in your piece, what areas are you most concerned about going forward when you worry about what you're working on and what you see as your biggest challenges? Whether it be budget constraint or large projects maybe that are coming up that we're going to need to finance or find a way to make are happening. What in your area is concerns or the parts that you worry about the most?
Yeah, my point of focus is just to make sure that as stewards of the public infrastructure, we're making informed and responsible decisions about how to care for the network. A lot of what we do is not terribly glamorous. It's the stuff that the traveling public assumes is going to get done, that our bridges are going to be in good shape and well maintained. And those things don't happen by accident. It takes a certain level of focus to make sure that we're aware of all those needs. Certainly, this is not at all unique to Vermont. The interstate system is really coming of age at this point, constructed 50s, 60s, 70s. That's now getting to be 75 years old. And there are a lot of buried pipes under the interstate that won't last forever. There's a lot of bridges that were built at the same time. So there's a growing slug of significant infrastructure that we will need to tend to over the coming decades. I'll be proactive in considering those needs. That's probably our biggest thinking. Point of focus is some of the unglamorous work of keeping the existing network chugging away for all of us.
Sounds good.
So following up on Representative Lally's question, how often do assets come up for repair or replacement? And there's an opportunity to put in a bike lane or a pedestrian lane, probably not on the interstates, but bridges and like smaller roads. Like, how often, and are there opportunities to have that happen more?
There are opportunities to make that happen. Certainly, anytime we get to certainly a reconstruction, those things are always going to be considered throughout the
That's just
design
kind of part
process.
of what you're
Absolutely.
thinking
That's
about.
with the obvious exception of interstate and things like that. But there is a like a pedestrian priority map where we can identify where there are corridors that merit more focused attention. If we're doing a rehabilitation, so a bridge deck replacement, yes, we will consider opportunities and the needs to line those up and provide for ulterior other modes. There are projects, some of our small scale things that we work hard to keep in scope. So if we're just resurfacing an existing road, we have to recognize that there's only so much we can do to increase the accommodations there without spending so much money that the project is now no longer what it intended to be, and we can't afford to do it. If we planned on a $2 million thin overlay, if it becomes too much bigger than that, we no longer have that money. It becomes a different animal and needs to be considered differently. So there are always things we're aware of. We're also cognizant that there are projects that are appropriate to incorporate other needs into, and sometimes we need to stay closely focused on the scope.
Following up on that, I had a question from a constituent recently about a paving project in my town, Roundabout. I'm wondering what other amenities like would, given the complete streets law, what would you be required to do if you're just doing a resurfacing? And would it be possible to do other options like crosswalks or an RFP or something like that?
And not knowing the details of that project, it's hard to say, but we recognize, particularly when we go through more urban communities, that there are probably going to be more interest in doing some of those things. So it depends on the nature of the project. If it is a project that by design is meant to buy us just a couple of years of sort of get more serviceable ride, or 5 or 10 years while a bigger project is coming farther down the road, we probably wouldn't incorporate those things. But on the other hand, like I said, if it was a rehabilitation or something where we're going down to the subbase, then typically we at least consider the community's interests in taking care of those added features. And there's tension there too, because we want to stay on budget and more money we spend in one location is money we can't spend in other locations. So
At what point in the process would you need input from the public?
certainly during the design phase and you'll hear about that in more detail later. Within the Asset Management Bureau, we tend not to be more specific about design elements other than say this is going to intended to be a rehabilitation or a preservation project or a reconstruction. That information is handed off to the design teams who make the more detailed decisions about those.
I'll follow up. I meet with
Yep.
Jeremy at some point.
We
Be more specific.
we look for opportunities and I'm speaking for the agency now. We certainly look for opportunities to make every common sense, low cost improvement we can while we're in the neighborhood. But on the other hand, sometimes we can incorporate grander schemes and sometimes we have to stay focused on the core mission.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, just a very quick. Is the data from your group available to the public, or could we look and say, hey, the state road in front of my house, how's that rated?
Yes, in most cases it is. Certainly our pavement condition and our bridge condition, our brief inspection material, that's all available through our V-Transparency app, which I think Jeremy's going to talk a little bit about tomorrow. And there are some data query tools that are available there, and they're probably geared towards people who are a little sophisticated in looking at data stuff, which doesn't mean anybody can't, but it may or may not be in a format that is really easy or looks easy to access. I will say that though, the data that we have online and the data we use is as recent as our most, or is as recent as our most recent validated data set. So for example, our bridge inspection data, most of our bridge inspections are of course done during the summer and spring and fall. That information gets compiled, quality checked, and there may only be a periodic update to the system, same for our pavement things, same for our pavement data, since it's only collected periodically, it may be 12 months old by the time the information you're looking at may be 12 months old, but that's as good as we have it and that's good for our management purposes as well. But yes, that stuff is generally available.
Thank you.
Okay, well, Ken, I guess we're at the end of your piece. Thank you very much for your presentation, and we'll just sort of hold tight here for a minute as we transition over to our next guest.
If anybody has any further questions, I'm happy to answer them in any form.
Appreciate it very much for coming. Thanks. Thank you very much. And we're gonna welcome our next witness, Robert White, with the agency, and he's gonna overview his next piece as we give him a few minutes to set up. We got a little bit to, but we're gonna stay live as a reminder, so.
Representative Warren. We did, yes, you talked about that, like, yeah. I know, that's my gold standard for where I want to get to go.
Is it better to plug in for the?
Yeah, yeah, plug in.
Only one.
Think we're all set, are we?
Yeah.
Well, welcome, Rob. We're gonna let you take it from there. I didn't get a chance to ask if you wanted questions throughout or you wanted to hold them till the end.
It doesn't matter, right during the presentation is fine with me.
Okay, we'll ready to go with
Great,
your presentation. Welcome.
great. For the record, I'm Rob White. I'm the Project Delivery Bureau Director at the Agency of Transportation and the Highway Division. The Project Delivery Bureau is comprised of about 150 employees in the Highway Division. And we're made up of 5 different program areas. And I'll go through each of these in detail, but generally they're the Municipal Assistance Program, Highway Safety and Design, Structures, Environmental, which is currently vacant. Actually, Environmental and Right-of-Way were one unit at previously, and we're breaking those apart now since they're very focused areas. And then Right-of-Way. You will be hearing from some of these folks once the budget address comes out, specifically Matt Bogacek in Highway Safety and Design and Carolyn Coda in Structures, and also Joel Perigo in Municipal Assistance. But I have the program managers' names, phone number, and their email addresses there. Or you have any questions about a specific project or anything, you can definitely reach out to those folks at any time, and myself as well. The structures section is made up of about 36 employees. They are focused on managing and designing the bridge and large culvert projects. Those large culverts are defined as anything that's 6 foot in diameter or greater. Within that program, they also have a hydraulic unit that not only aids with our own projects, but they also aid municipalities and other sections of the agency, and potentially interact with other agencies in the state on hydraulic issues. The picture you see there is a good example of a complicated structures project. That's Middlebury. That is the rail tunnel. Bless you.
But thank you.
That originally was 2 bridges on 2 separate streets and now is a tunnel. Next, we have Highway Safety and Design, about 26 employees in that program. They are managing and designing for highway, or what we call roadway improvement projects. That can be anything from a fairly simple paving project, to a full-blown roadway reconstruction project. They also deal with intersection improvements, slope and ledge, which have been very big in the past few years. And they also deal with the small culverts. So those are the culverts that are smaller than 6 foot in diameter. Good example is that picture that you see there on the right. That is Waterbury Main Street project. Any of you that remember or recall that project being done, it was very complicated. There was constrained right-of-way, lots of utilities, sidewalks, traffic, businesses that were close to the roadway. Very complex project that came out of the Highway and Safety Design group. Right-of-Way has about 55 employees. It's a very diverse group of folks here. They have our geodetic and route survey folks that are usually the first ones on the ground that you see out there gathering information for the project to be developed. And then we also have utility relocations, which is down at the bottom, a fairly small group that gets involved in a lot of projects. We have a lot of utilities within our corridors, both above ground and underground, that need to be relocated. And they deal with those folks. And then those middle items are sort of the property management / acquisition folks. So in this group, you're looking at surveyors, you have title experts, you have legal document experts, you have appraisers, negotiators, and then you have folks that are very well versed in utilities. So a very, very diverse group of folks there. The picture on the right, we have 2 pictures here. One is some survey equipment. Some of you may recognize that piece of guardrail with stickers on it and the view of the App Gap trailhead. So that's where that is set up. And I wanted to at least mention The map you see there is of all our cores units, which are continuously operating GPS units in the state, which we manage, which not only support our own staff, but support all surveyors across the state. So anytime they're doing a survey out there for any reason, they always have the opportunity to connect to some of those units since they're continuously operating. They're high accuracy units, and they give them another line or two to add to their triangulation. And some of you may know that I oversaw the right-of-way section for about 12 years. So right-of-way is sort of my expertise on many levels. So if you ever have any questions about right-of-way, happy to talk about it.
It's funny, Rob, that you get constituent feedback all the time that always says, why do they resurvey the same place over and over and over again? It's probably not true, but that's people's perception that you always get back, that the surveyors are always in the same place over and over and over again.
Yeah, and it's a great question. And honestly, when you see a survey crew, you're not really sure what they're doing. Specifically, they could be taking topo shots, right, of what are the details on the ground. They could be doing boundary information for right-of-way or private property boundaries. Or sometimes they're putting control down on the ground. So they use GPS equipment and our cores units and satellites to basically bring some coordinates to a ground point that then other surveyors may use. So there's a lot of different types of surveys out there. We also have an environmental section. It's a fairly small, 17 employees, but they have a big impact not only on the projects that we're developing in Project Delivery Bureau, but rail and aviation projects, maintenance projects, and potentially interact with other agencies in the state. They are responsible for gathering the permits for our projects and making sure we have regulatory compliance. A lot of varied expertise in this group. We're dealing with the NEPA process, which is the National Environmental Policy Act documentation process, which is required on any project that has federal funds. They're looking at archaeology and historic properties, stormwater, water quality, Act 250, wetlands, wetland impacts, wildlife habitat, things of that nature. I included these pictures here. This is a great example of a structures project in the past that sort of hits on the historic piece. Some of you may recognize this bridge. This is the Checkered House Bridge in Richmond. A little history here. The bridge prior to this one was a covered bridge, and the flood of 27 damaged it greatly, and so it had to be replaced. And so the Checker House Bridge is a flood of 27 bridge. It just happens to be the tallest bridge that was replaced with that effort, bringing it some historic significance. The one downfall to this bridge in its original state, and if any of you crossed it prior to this project, you'll know that it was very, very narrow. 2 trucks had to be cautious about mirrors hitting when you went through that bridge. So because of its historic nature, what you can see, we did a very unique project where we cut away one of the trusses and moved it to the outside and then added, and I think you might cursor here, maybe not.
I can see where it's up.
And you can see the added members to create a wider structure. So almost all of the original structure is still in place.
It's right there.
Yes, it's right off the interstate. So as you go by the Richmond exit, you can just see it off to the side, right in front of the Caterpillar dealership. And then our final program is municipal assistance, which is a very popular program. It's a place that I worked early on in my career. Has about 16 employees, which basically use various types of grants to give money to municipalities for various types of projects. And they can be very, very small projects, could be sidewalk improvement project, or they can be very, very large, like the Champlain Parkway. So everything sort of under the sun here for municipalities. And like I say, that since I was there, which was many years ago, that program has grown extensively and has a lot of opportunities for funds. And you'll be hearing from Joel Pirago at some point. There's a lot of information out there for municipalities to determine where there might be money that can help them.
Depending on your constituent interest or your interest as a representative, that for some is an area they spend an awful lot of time in, and for others, it may not be as appropriate. But I know a number of members of this committee spend a lot of time working in that area with their town managers and village managers and whatever other titles that are out there, but we'll see Joel on the schedule here shortly.
And that picture there is a good example. That is a bridge that was added to, I believe that's the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail. That project has been in the limelight for quite some time, but that is a bridge that replaced what would have been previously a railroad bridge of some sort to accommodate bikes and pedestrians. You can see in the list down through there, though, there is a lot of different types of projects. One thing I also want to mention is at the bottom of that list is Park and Rides. That's a program where we have a portion of that money for municipal park and rides, but we also develop our own park and rides under that program. And so any of the park and rides that you see across the state, we manage those and build those, like the new Williston Park and Ride, for example.
Question.
Oh, I was just gonna comment on that LVRT bridge, which I think might be in Jeffersonville. But if it is in Jeffersonville, and I think it might be, it did more than just facilitate connectivity on the LVRT. It replaced a former bridge that was actually creating a real pinch point where the river is. And so they also considerably widened it. It's just a great example of how this can actually foster safer conditions in communities. As many people know, Jeffersonville is very prone to flooding. So it was a piece of the puzzle that the infrastructure puzzle that has made that community a bit safer for the folks that live there. So I just wanted to kind of give you guys a plug, because this can involve many different strains of input, including managing riverine flooding and other things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mentioned the hydraulic section previously, but anytime we go to, let's say, replace a bridge, whether it's something like this, where there might have been an older railroad bridge and we're putting in a new bridge, or whether it's rehabbing the Checker House Bridge, or whatever, we're always looking to bring it up to new standards, not only the bridge, but to make sure that waterway is not restricted in any way.
Rob, I can just wonder if you could touch on how many vacancies you have under your department, and most particularly the vacancy at the top of the environmental division, and how that may hamper that program functioning this year.
Yeah, so currently, I would say probably a month ago, we had around 8 to 10 vacancies in our group. We've been fairly lucky to keep the numbers low. We had some difficulty finding folks that would qualify or want to put in for our positions. But I will say, just in the last few weeks, we've had some good turnout for positions. And I think we're down to, maybe with a few folks being brought in the last few weeks, we might be down to maybe 3 or 4. So back when I mentioned earlier that right-of-way environmental were together, there was a time that they were split apart, and then we put them together. And Nick Wark, who was mentioned under right-of-way, he has been overseeing the environmental group for quite some time. And so he still is overseeing their work, and they have some staff that's been there for quite some time. So it's not necessarily hampering what they do currently. And we're hopeful to get somebody in there fairly soon. We have we have a list of candidates and we should be starting interviews, I would say, in the next week or so. But I will say, we have struggled finding engineers, and I think you heard the secretary say that in his opening testimony. We have seen a little bit of uptick in the recent times, but it still is a very small candidate pool compared to what it used to be, surely.
So you're, potentially baking, probably 3 vacancies for next year's budget.
Yep. That's what I had. I went.
To the end of maybe we gave all the groups a little too much time on our schedule. But we'll work at it. Everybody's new at this end of the table in their new spots and new roles and whatnot. So other members for questions, whatnot, Rob's area of I guess supervision and leadership is pretty wide in terms of the amount of different areas there. So please.
So, Rob, you work in the budgeting of all these projects?
We do budget these projects, yeah.
Yeah, and there's a way that we could see per capita spending or spending by county, or how do you keep track?
Well, they're by project, but I think, probably our data sets could bring it to a county level potentially. Sure.
Mhm.
Sure. I mean, you're going to hear from, once the governor gives his budget address, you're going to hear from some of those program managers. They're going to come in and talk about their programs and the projects that are currently under development and the projects that we foresee in the future starting up. The majority of the federal funds that the secretary talked about come through the highway division. We have a host of projects that use those federal funds. We're putting out probably, it ranges, but we're putting out about 50 to 100 projects annually. And when I say putting them out to construction and on the grounds, but we have upwards of 400 to 500 projects on the books that we're working on on various stages. Yeah. Some projects are fairly quick to get out. A pretty simple paving project can get out in 6 to 8 months, a year. More complicated projects take many, many years sometimes.
I'd be very interested in the distribution of projects and the money, particularly that by county or by municipality.
Okay.
And that'll be easy to do, Representative Keezers. We've had representatives in the past that when we get the white book, we delve right through and make copies of it. Your money's all there. You can bring it home to your constituents. So it's quite easy to track.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the information for a freshman.
Representative White.
Thank you for your presentation. And so I would love to hear you speak a little bit more about the grants that you referred to under the municipal assistance. Where are they coming from? Who's in charge of, getting those grants and bringing them to the towns? Or what is that process?
Yeah, and I can hit on it generally, but honestly, when Joel comes in, he is an expert in that arena and he can talk through the various different types. But some of the more common ones is, I did mention we have a municipal park and ride program that municipalities can apply for money to add a parking ride. Sometimes it's to parking lots that already exist for their town offices or whatever. So there's money there. We give out a lot of bike and ped grants that can be very small in nature, but very big. So there's opportunities there. Grants and aid is money out there for each town to help with maintaining their roadways and keeping them in compliance with stormwater runoff and things of that nature. So, and there's a whole lot more. There's some all state funded bike and ped grants that is a 50-50 program where we'll give you 50% of the funds that you need and the town has to put up the other 50%. Most of these federally funded programs are 80-20 or 80-10-10, meaning it's 80% federal funds, and then there's a portion of local funds that need to be put towards them. They have a couple different solicitations that go out through the year. We're actually trying to combine some of those up. So there's one application process and and you can sort of check off what you're looking for money and how that money might be used, because transportation alternatives may look at certain types of activities where Bike and Ped look at others. But again, Joel's going to come in the coming weeks, and he would be happy to go through those. And there's actually some great information out there on a public facing website that talks about, you know, where is the money? Where can you get it, and how do you apply for it, which is really good.
And what is Joel's last name?
Perigo.
Representative Farr?
Yeah, and just to add on to that, over the last couple of years, been looking at these, I think because they impact all of our towns and villages. I'm hoping, and I don't expect you to answer this, but to look at these and really understand, like you say, some of them are pure state money, 50-50. Some of them are federal money, and you know, one question, I'm just making sure, I know we try to maximize the federal money for the state highways, you know, for all of those sort of projects. And then I want to just really make sure, how do we maximize the federal money coming in for these sort of projects too? And whether we are, or what might be limiting it. I know for our town, even that 20% match on $1 million project is, you know, too much in some cases, and certainly for smaller villages and stuff. So as we get to that point, I'm sort of trying to understand how the funding is, understanding this, you know, what's coming directly from the state and what are federal opportunities, and are we missing any of those, and why would we be missing them?
Yeah, great focal point. We are taking a lot closer look at how some of those funding opportunities go out. I will say, you know, one of our most recent concerns is the Transportation Alternative Program, which has quite a bit of funds in it. We are struggling to get projects from communities to come in fast enough, meaning not the application process, but they're actually applying, they have the opportunity for money, but you know, they're busy doing other things too. And it's hard to get those projects developed into construction so that we can spend that money. We only have a certain amount of time to spend certain amounts or certain pots of money. And so we're getting a little nervous that we're starting to bump up against these thresholds, and we don't want to lose any money. Definitely. That is one of our focus points. Sure.
So it might be towns or villages don't have the resources to apply, or, you know, push it through, waiting for planning information perhaps, or again, that match, I think, could be a challenge for some. So that's a great topic to explore.
Yeah, match even on the state level for state projects is a tough one,
Yeah.
right? Like we're always in need of match usually for federal funds.
Representative Lau?
Thank you. Just to circle back to the Vermont state standards, which is very exciting. If we can simplify what can happen, you know, I often consider, you know, Danville, we put the tremendous investment into improving walking and biking in that village, but you know, it's a bit sort of gold plated and incredibly expensive. And so I think we need more flexibility in our standards so that we can make these very scarce resources go farther. And I would like to encourage the agency to consider using the expertise that's at our RPCs, or perhaps developing it in our RPCs to provide that technical assistance to these little tiny places that are often, you know, just the capacity challenges on top of the affordability challenges. It's overwhelming to them, and it's very concerning that you know, we want to focus housing in our villages and our designated downtowns. That is the thrust of all of our policy, and I think we're hoping to all make strides on that this biennium. Yet we are, you know, we have these barriers to doing that. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, great. And you know, regional planning RPCs, regional planning commissions are definitely a partner of ours in a lot of these projects. And specifically when you're talking about, municipal assistance, they're always there to help towns. Not all towns are as large as Burlington, South Burlington. We have a lot smaller towns. I'm from northern New Hampshire originally, and so I think of Guildhall and places like that. And there are times when RPCs actually step up and normally those municipal projects need a municipal project manager. Sometimes it's a person that's actually in the town, which is in many ways tough because they have their own job to do on a day-to-day basis, not necessarily managing a project. But RPCs sometimes step into that role, which is very helpful because they're very knowledgeable about the area, but they also know about our programs as well. So that is a good place. These projects, as simple as they might be, once they use federal funds, they get complicated fast, right? There's a lot of requirements. That's what our folks are doing. They're making sure that municipalities are hitting all the marks to be sure that they don't lose their federal funds. So they get very complicated very fast, for sure.
Any other questions? I'll ask you the same question I asked our last witness. So of all the area that you are responsible for and the pieces that you have to manage and look into the future of where our entire infrastructure is, our project, what are the things that worry you on a regular basis? What are the things that we would potentially be able to try to help with? What are the things that are your biggest challenges in front of?
I wasn't really prepared for that question.
The word will get around quickly to the next witness and the next one. Because somebody has to be first, right? The first one through the door always gets its heart.
Yeah. I'd just say we have a lot of hurdles in front of us, especially when it comes to funding. We have a lot of needs across the network. And just one of my concerns is that we can get the things done that we need to get done. I think I heard the secretary talk about, look, when you travel the same road every day and it's in a poor condition, like that's all you know, right? Like the roads are poor in Vermont, it must be. But we're working on and bringing roads up to a better standard every year. But to the individuals, that might be what you see. I travel Route 2 a lot from East Montpelier up to Lancaster, New Hampshire, which is my hometown. That corridor was in pretty rough shape for quite a long time and was frustrating to travel, but now it's in a much better condition and it's a lot nicer. But we have a lot of needs out there. I know the secretary also mentioned, the Richmond culvert on the interstate that went down. We have situations like that happening more and more every year. We have aging infrastructure, but I will say we have some good infrastructure too. I showed the Checker House Bridge, right? That's a flooded 27 bridge. It's in fantastic shape. We rehabbed that a few years ago. It's in great shape. Our interstate is generally in good shape, meaning, there's some places where the pavement is in need of some repair, and we are doing some of those projects. But, I'm just really interested in, I wish we had all the money to get everything done that we wanted to get done. I think we're spreading it out over time, and it's going to be a little frustrating for all of us, not only the traveling public, myself as an individual driving kids to sporting events or whatever, or just me as a transportation official. It gets frustrating when you just can't quite do what you want to do. I appreciate the representative that said, let's make things a little more simpler. Sometimes things can be a little more complicated than we really want them to be. I think when you work in bureaucracy, it's even more frustrating sometimes because you have to deal with these things. I mentioned I worked in right-of-way for 12 years. Right-of-way can be tough, right? We're going out there, we're asking folks to give us their land and pay them for it so that we can improve the roadway. And that can be tough to do sometimes. We got the Winooski Burlington Bridge, third highest ADT for a non-interstate bridge in the state. Carries a lot of people, whether they're walking, biking, or driving. That is also a flood of 27 bridge. Although it appears much more modern than that. It's going to be a tough one, both financially and just to do the project. There is a lot going on around there, and there's going to be some right-of-way needs there that aren't going to be easy to gather. So that's an interesting project because we have a very short time frame to get it done because we've received some federal grant money that has some time constraints on it. So generally, that's my worry is that we're able to develop projects and have them ready and have the money that's there for them to get done as well. I appreciate the comment about optimizing our funds, and having the appropriate money to leverage the federal funds, because, that's what we're looking at on a daily basis.
Thank you. I very much appreciate you going in that direction. Representative. What? Excuse me,
have
sorry.
A
Go ahead.
comment and a question. So to Representative Lally, when you were talking about Danville, and the pressure on these small communities to try to get their acts together to benefit from state and federal grants, just commenting in our district, we have a Mad River Valley Planning District, so it brings together 3 towns and they liaise with the regional planning district, but that's been a real source of strength for our valley and in terms of planning, looking at bike paths, looking at, how we dealt with flooding, what we did differently to be more resilient for flooding. So just that the strength in bringing those towns together and actually paying an executive director, it's been really beneficial for our town. Another comment, and then I'll get to my question. But when you were talking about the environmental part of your department, I just want to make a comment about what I think is really smart investment in vegetation and landscaping on highways from a marketing the state of Vermont perspective. I think when we are driving through other states, I've paid a lot of attention to how I experience a state driving through it. And it really is based on the condition of the road and the beauty of the road. And Vermont is such a beautiful state, but, wildflowers, just, these are not high expenses, but I just think that it's really good value for us to be investing in beautifying our roadways as kind of a marketing component of Vermont. And that tourism is so central to our state. And on my question, you talked about some of the challenges. What would you say are some of your victories or things that you feel really good about that your department or agency has done in the last couple of years? Just kind of high notes.
Yeah. First, let me mention, when you talk about beauty, I'll just mention we just received a pollinator grant from the federal government. So you will see some projects out there planting wildflowers to promote pollinators in the state. So that's something we're pretty proud of that we recently received. I'm very excited about where our bridges are performance wise. I think we're doing very well in the bridge side of things, which is great because I think in the last few years we've seen some bridges across the nation where there's been some failures. And so I think that drew some concern to Vermont. But as far as bridges are concerned, we're doing fairly well with keeping those bridges up and running. I'd also say we have done a lot of great things on the bike and ped front. LVRT is a great one, and it's sort of the poster child for a lot of what we're doing. But quite frankly, we have lots of bike and ped facilities across the state that we should be proud of. So I think we do a good job with that. And I'll put in a little plug for the standard project, the standard roadway, the standard bridge project that we also incorporate a lot of bike and ped attributes on. When we're talking about the Burlington-Winooski Bridge, one of the major focuses there is bike and pedestrians. Not only just the facility for them, but the protection from traffic and other things. So I think we do a good job in that arena as well. Just wanted to comment about Danville was mentioned a couple of times and those types of town projects. And I've been doing this for quite some time. And I'll just say that, when a project comes to your town, right, most folks feel like that's their opportunity and it's going to be one opportunity probably for quite some time. And so they want to get everything they can. And I can appreciate that. But I think I heard Ken previously too, like that takes time and that takes money. So as long as you can sort of be in the process early on, and I'm going off from what he was saying and a little bit into that information is getting that information early on about what we want to do and what we can do helps out to keep projects on schedule and on budget, which we're really focused on. So.
So. Anybody else have any other questions? Then I guess I will thank you very much, Rob, for your presentation and your availability and all the your future teammates that are coming in to present to us. And with that, I guess for this morning, we're going to wrap up for a bit, take a break, and we will be back for 10:45. Hold on for a second as a committee before you take off, but you will have a little bit of time to go. But Rob,